The cold metal of the gun burned in Sarah's trembling hand as she stood over the lifeless body of Officer Paul. Blood pooled beneath him, staining the ground, while distant sirens grew louder with each passing second. Her heart hammered in her chest, the weight of what she'd just done crashing down on her like a tidal wave. "I had no choice," she whispered, the words barely escaping her lips. "I had to protect us." In the haunting silence that followed, Sarah knew there was no going back. The walls she had built were crumbling, and the truth would soon catch up with her. The question was, would she survive the consequences of the choices she had made? Sarah stood over Officer Paul's lifeless body, the sight of his blood spilling onto the cold, unforgiving ground sending a wave of nausea through her stomach. The gun in her hand was still smoking, the metal growing hot against her trembling fingers. Her breath came in short, jagged bursts as she stared down at the man she had just killed. The sharp sound of distant sirens filled the air, but to Sarah, it felt like the world had gone silent, her own heart beat louder than anything else. Blood pooled beneath Paul's crumpled form, his face frozen in shock, the moment of violence forever etched in the stillness of the night. She could barely process what had happened, and yet, there was no mistaking the truth. Paul was dead, and her life, as she knew it, was over. Her heart hammered in her chest, each beat a deafening reminder of the gravity of what she'd just done. The gun felt impossibly heavy in her hand, a weight that was more than physical. It was the crushing weight of guilt, of fear, of betrayal. Her hands shook violently as she dropped the weapon to the ground, the sound of it hitting the concrete echoing in her ears. The cold night air pressed against her skin, but it wasn't enough to calm the storm inside her. Her breath was erratic, desperate gasps of air that didn't seem to fill her lungs. Panic consumed her as she realized just how deep the hole she had dug for herself was. Alone in the dark, surrounded by nothing but her own racing thoughts, Sarah struggled to comprehend the depth of the irreversible action she had just taken. The wail of sirens in the distance grew louder, a shrill reminder that the consequences were drawing closer. Sarah's heart skipped a beat as she turned her head, looking over her shoulder into the shadows where she knew the police were coming. She could already feel the weight of their inevitable arrival pressing against her chest, suffocating her as the seconds ticked away. Her mind raced, her thoughts spinning in a blur of panic and regret. She needed to act fast. There was no turning back now. The sirens were a constant reminder that everything was about to change, that the life she had built and the choices she had made would now come crashing down around her. The camera zoomed in on Sarah's face, capturing the raw emotion that had overtaken her. Fear, guilt, and regret all played out in her wide, unblinking eyes. Her chest tightened with the weight of her actions as she took a step back, her knees almost giving way beneath her. "I had no choice," she whispered to herself, her voice breaking in the empty night. "I had to protect us." Her words barely reached her own ears, the regret heavy in each syllable. This wasn't how it was supposed to be. She had never imagined it would come to this, to taking another life just to protect the fragile world she had built with Alex. Her hands were shaking, the gun lying abandoned on the cold ground, and yet, the real weight was the burden in her chest. She had crossed a line, and there was no way to undo it. The consequences were coming. She could feel them, could almost taste them. The world around Sarah seemed to slow, stretching each moment into eternity. The sirens were louder now, the noise vibrating through her body, but her mind remained frozen, suspended in the aftermath of her decision. The calm before the storm felt endless, this brief, suffocating pause where time didn't matter. Her body was locked in place, her eyes fixed on Paul's body, the evidence of her crime now irrefutable. She stood between two worlds, one that was slipping away, and one that was about to crash into her. The police were coming. Her life was over. The guilt of what she had done was settling in deeper, suffocating her every breath. As Sarah took a final glance down at the lifeless officer, she knew she had made her choice. No matter how hard she tried, there was no going back. The inevitable consequences were closing in, and all she could do now was brace herself for what came next. Sarah Williams had always been a woman of routine. Her life, predictable and steady, revolved around her job at the high-security prison. Every morning, she dressed in her uniform, a heavy, colorless garment that reflected the monotony of her existence. She walked the long halls of the prison with a professional demeanor, her steps mechanical as she watched over dangerous criminals. Her colleagues often joked about her stoic nature, but to Sarah, there was comfort in the sameness of each day. She had no desire for the chaos of relationships or the pain of opening herself up to others. Divorce had left her with a bitterness she could never quite shake off, and her friendships were fleeting more out of obligation than genuine connection. Her life outside the prison walls was sparse, defined by the occasional dinner alone or a phone call with a distant relative. Her emotions, long buried under the surface, had become a distant echo of what they once were. In this rigid world of rules and regulations, there was no room for vulnerability, no place for the longing that simmered just beneath the surface. For Sarah, the prison had become more than just a job. It was a sanctuary from a world she no longer cared to be a part of. Sarah's loneliness was an unspoken companion, following her like a shadow. It wasn't just the absence of people, it was the emptiness that came with a life lived without true connection. At night, when the silence of her small apartment pressed in on her, Sarah often found herself staring at the ceiling, wondering what it might be like to feel truly seen, to be wanted, not for her role as a prison officer, but as a woman. The isolation gnawed at her. She had learned to fill the void with the busyness of work, but even that didn't satisfy the deep hunger inside her. A hunger for affection, for connection, for someone who would look at her and see more than just the woman in uniform. But after the divorce, after years of self-imposed solitude, she had convinced herself that she didn't need anything more. She had learned to ignore the longing for intimacy, locking it away in the farthest corner of her mind. Still, it was there, lying in wait. The longing would never go away, not entirely. But she had managed to convince herself that the price of connection was far too high, that it was easier to bury her needs than to face the heartbreak of never having them met. It was late when Sarah first noticed Alex Hunter. At first, he was just another inmate, a name on a list, a number in the system. But as the days passed, something about him started to gnaw at her. Alex was different. Where other prisoners remained hostile or indifferent, Alex was sharp, observant, and charismatic in a way that no one else was. Sarah's initial interactions with him were brief, nothing more than routine security checks and brief exchanges. But each time their eyes met, there was something unspoken, a quiet intensity that made her heart flutter in an unfamiliar way. He was charming, in a quiet, dangerous sort of way, and she couldn't help but feel drawn to him. One day, as Sarah walked past his cell, Alex called out to her. His voice was low, smooth, and when she turned to look at him, he was smiling almost as if he had been waiting for her. His eyes held something that both scared and intrigued her. "Officer Williams," he said, his tone playful but knowing. "You're different from the others. You don't seem like the type to just follow orders." Sarah felt a shiver run down her spine, but she forced a smile, trying to mask the sudden wave of unease that washed over her. "Just doing my job," she replied, avoiding his gaze. But Alex wasn't finished. He continued to speak, his words soft but deliberate, breaking through her walls one sentence at a time. His conversations were casual at first, small talk about the prison, the weather, life beyond the walls. But over time, the exchanges grew longer, more personal, more intimate. Alex asked about her life, about her past, and for the first time in years, Sarah felt herself opening up. "I think you've forgotten what it feels like to feel alive, Sarah," Alex said one day, his voice tender, almost sympathetic. "You live in a cage, just like the rest of us. You don't have to, you know." His words were like a breath of fresh air, a reminder of something she had long abandoned. She laughed it off, but in the deepest part of her heart, she couldn't help but wonder if he was right. Had she been living in a cage all along? And if so, was it possible to escape? As the weeks passed, their conversations grew deeper, more personal. Sarah found herself looking forward to the moments when Alex would speak to her, even if only for a few minutes. His presence became a secret comfort, a brief escape from the lonely routine that defined her life. Alex spoke of his past, the mistakes he had made, the people he had hurt, and the regrets that weighed on him. But there was something in his words that drew Sarah in, something about the way he wore his sorrow with such grace that it made her ache for him. She began to open up about her own life, about the divorce, the emptiness she had buried inside for so long. Alex listened without judgment, his eyes soft, as if he truly understood her pain. "I know what it's like to be trapped," Alex said one evening, his voice barely above a whisper. "I know what it's like to feel like you're invisible. But you're not, Sarah. You never were." The words hung in the air, heavy with meaning. Sarah didn't know what to say, but for the first time in years, she felt seen. She felt understood. And in that moment, she realized just how far she had fallen into Alex's world. She wanted more than just these stolen conversations. She wanted to escape, to leave behind the suffocating walls of her life. And somehow, Alex seemed to be the key to it all. It started small little favors, harmless lies. Alex would ask her for something he knew he couldn't get on his own, and Sarah, eager to prove her loyalty to him, would comply. At first, it was just small things: passing him a piece of contraband, making sure the security cameras were off for a few moments during one of his private visits. But as time went on, the stakes grew higher. One evening, Alex mentioned something casually about escaping the prison, a plan he had been working on for months. "I could be out of here, Sarah," he said, his voice low and urgent. "And I want you with me. We can get out of this place together. I just need your help." The words stirred something in Sarah: fear, excitement, and a strange sense of possibility. She had never imagined herself in a life like this, helping an inmate escape, breaking the law in such a dangerous way. But for the first time in years, she felt alive. Alive in a way she hadn't felt since she was a young woman full of dreams and desires. Sarah hesitated, torn between the morality she had always clung to and the longing for something more, something that Alex promised her. She knew she shouldn't, but the thought of a life outside the prison walls, free with Alex, was too tempting to resist. The days after Sarah's initial conversations with Alex felt heavier. She could feel the subtle shift in the atmosphere around her, a shift that seemed to center on her increasing attention to the inmate. Her colleagues, especially Paul, began to notice the subtle changes in her behavior: how she lingered near Alex's cell a little too long, how she became more withdrawn during shifts. Paul, who had always been blunt and no-nonsense, was quick to pick up on the small clues. It was only a matter of time before his suspicions grew into accusations. "Hey, Sarah," Paul said one day as they both stood by the control room, eyes scanning the prison yard. His voice was casual, but there was an edge to it. "You spending an awful lot of time with that Hunter guy? I thought we weren't supposed to get too close to the inmates. You know the rules." Sarah froze for a moment, the air in the room suddenly feeling thick, her throat tightening. She forced a smile, a rehearsed one. "I'm just doing my job, Paul. No need to worry." But Paul wasn't convinced. His eyes narrowed slightly, and there was something about his stare that made Sarah's pulse race. He wasn't just making small talk. He was probing. And as much as she tried to brush it off, a creeping anxiety began to gnaw at her from the inside. The walls were closing in. That night, after the shift ended, Sarah overheard Paul talking to one of the other officers, Don. She hadn't meant to eavesdrop, but as she passed by the staff room, she couldn't help but catch snippets of their conversation. "I've been watching her," Paul's voice carried from inside the room. She's getting too close to Hunter. Something's not right. I don't trust her. Sarah's heart stopped. The words felt like a slap, cold and unforgiving. She quickly stepped away, retreating to the quiet of the guard's break room. Her mind raced with the realization that Paul had been watching her, watching every move. Every glance she'd stolen at Alex, every lingering second she spent listening to him, had been noticed. The secret she thought was hers alone was now under suspicion. Her hands trembled slightly as she tried to steady her breathing. No, she whispered to herself. It's fine. It's just Paul. He's paranoid. But even as she said the words, the weight of the truth pressed down on her, threatening to break her resolve. Over the next few days, Paul's behavior became more pointed. He would make passive-aggressive comments when they were alone, his voice carrying a quiet challenge. "Anything interesting happened during your rounds, Sarah?" he'd ask, leaning against the doorframe of the control room, his eyes fixed on her like he was waiting for a slip-up. "You never know what you'll find in a place like this." Sarah's stomach churned every time he spoke. The suspicion in his voice was palpable, but he never came out and directly accused her. Instead, he planted seeds of doubt, making her feel like she was under constant surveillance. It was becoming suffocating, like a net closing in around her. One evening, as she stood near Alex's cell, Sarah caught sight of Paul watching from a distance. His eyes were fixed on her, his arms crossed in that way that made it clear he was drawing conclusions. She felt a cold sweat break out on her neck. "Focus," she whispered to herself, willing the fear to dissipate. But the truth was undeniable. Paul knew something was off, and it wouldn't be long before he figured it all out. The situation with Paul only heightened Sarah's desperation. She found herself looking for ways to keep the secret safe, slipping into a routine of lies and small acts of rebellion. Alex's words from their first deep conversation echoed in her mind, "You don't have to live in a cage, Sarah. You deserve more than this." She began to act on those words. At first, it was little things. A few extra minutes during her rounds to allow Alex to speak to a visitor. Giving him a pen she wasn't supposed to. Anything that might help him feel like he was in control, like there was a way out. But it wasn't enough. Alex pushed her further, asking for more, subtly manipulating her. His smile, full of charm and hidden intent, would always be there, a reminder of what they could have together. Sarah was addicted to the feeling of being seen, of being needed. "Do you ever wonder what it would be like?" Alex asked one evening, his voice soft, almost like a secret. "What it would be like to walk out of here? To be free, just the two of us." Her heart raced at the thought. Her mind screamed that it was wrong, that she was crossing a line she couldn't come back from. But when she looked at Alex, she saw a glimmer of hope, something beyond the walls, beyond the chains that bound them both. "I don't know," she whispered, voice cracking. "I just want. I want something different." Alex took her hand through the bars, his touch warm against her skin. "You can have that, Sarah. You just have to trust me." And that trust, fragile and uncertain, was exactly what Alex needed. It all came to a head one late afternoon, when Sarah found herself alone in the security office with Paul. His eyes were narrowed, his posture tense as he leaned against the door, blocking her exit. "You've been making mistakes, Sarah," Paul's voice was low, almost threatening. "I've been watching you. You've been slipping. You've been helping him." Her heart stopped. Every breath felt like a betrayal as Paul's words hit her like a ton of bricks. She had no way out. The walls were closing in. "I don't know what you're talking about," she lied, trying to keep her voice steady, but she could hear the tremble in her words. Paul stepped closer, his eyes piercing. "I know, Sarah. I know everything. And I'm not going to let you ruin your life and mine over this. If you're smart, you'll back off." Sarah's pulse raced, her stomach sinking. "I can't," she whispered. "I can't stop. I have to do this. For us." Paul's lips tightened into a grim line. "Then you've sealed your fate." The words hung in the air, heavy with finality. The choice had been made. There was no going back now. The realization hit Sarah like a punch to the gut. She had crossed a line she could never uncross. She wasn't just a prison officer anymore, she was complicit, tangled in a dangerous web of lies and betrayal. Her heart was heavy with the weight of the choices she had made, and for the first time, she understood the cost of what she was doing. She stood in the hallway, her hands trembling as the truth hit her. Alex had never promised her salvation, he had promised her a chance to escape. But at what cost? She closed her eyes, feeling the suffocating weight of the prison closing in around her. And as the sound of Paul's footsteps echoed behind her, Sarah knew there was no way out, not unless she made a decision that would change everything. It was the moment Sarah had been dreading, the moment when the walls she had carefully built came crashing down. Paul had been waiting for this, and she knew it. The tension between them had reached a boiling point, and now there was no avoiding it. Sarah found herself face to face with Paul in the dimly lit hallway just off the main guard station. His eyes were cold, unyielding, like the walls of the prison itself. He wasn't the same Paul she had known, the gruff but reliable officer she'd worked alongside for years. No, this man was a stranger, someone who had peeled back the layers of her life and seen too much. "I know what you're doing, Sarah," Paul said, his voice low, a quiet threat simmering beneath the surface. "I've been watching you. Watching the way you look at him. The way you let him play you." Sarah's pulse quickened, her breath coming in short, sharp gasps. She took a step back, but the hallway felt smaller now, narrower, suffocating. She could feel the weight of his accusation pressing down on her chest. I don't know what you're talking about, Paul," she stammered, her words a feeble attempt to deny the undeniable. Her hand instinctively reached for the radio on her belt, but Paul's gaze held her in place. "No more lies," he snapped, taking a step forward. "I know you're helping him. I know you've crossed the line, and if you don't stop now, you'll regret it for the rest of your life." Her body froze as his words sank in. The walls of the prison, once so familiar and safe, felt like they were closing in. She could hear the steady beat of her heart in her ears, drowning out the world around her. "I'm sorry, Paul," she whispered, her voice trembling with fear. "I didn't mean for it to go this far. I don't know how to stop." Paul's expression softened for a brief moment, a flicker of pity in his eyes. But it quickly faded, replaced by the hard, unyielding gaze of someone who had already made up his mind. "You don't get it, do you?" he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "You're not just helping him escape, Sarah. You're throwing your life away." The words cut deep, and in that instant, something inside Sarah snapped. The truth was staring her in the face. She had crossed a line, and there was no going back. The choice was made. As Paul took another step toward her, something inside Sarah shifted. Panic surged through her body, clouding her thoughts. There was no escape, no way out of this conversation without facing the consequences. "Don't make me report you, Sarah," Paul said, his voice growing harsher, more insistent. "I'll make sure you're never able to wear that badge again. You'll be locked up just like him." The words hit Sarah like a slap. She could see it all now, the end of everything she had known. The shame, the disgrace, the prison walls that would eventually hold her as well. Her mind raced, searching for a way out, but there was none. Suddenly, without thinking, her hand shot to the gun holstered at her side, her fingers curling around the handle. Her movements were quick, instinctive. Before she even realized what she was doing, she had pulled the gun free and pointed it directly at Paul. Paul froze, his eyes widening in shock. The atmosphere between them shifted in an instant. The cold metal of the gun in Sarah's hand felt heavier than anything she had ever held. But in that moment, she didn't care. I can't go back, Paul, she said, her voice barely audible. I can't let him win. I can't lose everything. Paul's face twisted in disbelief, his hands raised as if to placate her. Sarah, don't. The gunshot rang out, deafening in the silence of the hall. Paul's body crumpled to the floor, his life slipping away in an instant. Sarah stood frozen, her arm still outstretched, the gun smoking in her hand. The silence that followed the gunshot was deafening. Sarah's mind seemed to go blank as she looked down at Paul's body, his life extinguished in a split second. The harsh reality of what she had just done crashed over her like a wave, drowning her in guilt and fear. Her breathing became shallow, her heart pounding in her chest. She looked down at the gun in her hand, its weight now unbearable. The room felt smaller, the walls closing in on her with every passing second. What have I done? She whispered, her voice trembling. For a moment, she stood there, motionless, her eyes fixed on Paul's lifeless body. The sirens in the distance began to grow louder, signaling the arrival of the authorities. Panic surged through her chest, and her thoughts scattered like leaves in the wind. She had no time. The consequences were coming, and they were coming fast. Without thinking, she dropped the gun, her fingers numb from the shock of what she had just done. She turned and ran, her footsteps echoing down the hallway as she fled toward the back exit. She had to get out. There was no other option now. As Sarah ran, her mind raced, the images of Paul's body flashing before her eyes. She had never wanted this. She had never wanted to hurt anyone. But in that moment, everything she had worked for, everything she had hoped for, had been on the line. She had made a choice, and now there was no going back. I had no choice, she repeated to herself, over and over, as if the words would somehow make the reality of what she had done more bearable. I had to protect him. I had to protect us. But deep down, Sarah knew the truth. She had killed Paul, not just to protect Alex, but because she had been too afraid to face the consequences of her actions. She had been too afraid to let go of the illusion that Alex was her way out, her way to freedom. As she made her way toward the back exit, her hands shaking, the sirens grew louder. She knew she couldn't outrun what she had done. But for the first time in her life, she didn't care. She had chosen this. She had made her bed, and now she would lie in it. When Sarah reached the back door, she stopped. The cold night air hit her face, but it did nothing to calm the storm raging inside her. She stood there, frozen, her hand on the door handle. She knew what was waiting for her. The sirens were closer now. Her heart hammered in her chest. It was only a matter of time before the police arrived, before they found her and arrested her for what she had done. Her thoughts turned to Alex. She had done this for him. She had thrown her life away for him. But now, as she stood there in the darkness, she realized something she hadn't allowed herself to see before. Alex wasn't her savior. He had never been. He had manipulated her, used her as a pawn in his game. And now, she was paying the price. Her knees gave way, and she sank to the ground, her hands trembling as she pulled her knees to her chest. The weight of her actions crashed down on her all at once, and the reality of her choices was undeniable. She had sacrificed everything: her career, her freedom, her soul, and for what? There was no escape now. The police were coming, and her future, the future she had once dreamed of with Alex, was shattered beyond repair. As the sirens drew nearer, Sarah couldn't bring herself to move. She had made her choice, and now, she would face the consequences. The sound of footsteps echoed in the distance, but she was beyond caring. Her life, as she knew it, was over. The love she had thought was real, the hope for a new beginning, was nothing but a cruel illusion. She was left alone, in the cold, with nothing but the weight of her guilt to hold her. And as the darkness closed in around her, Sarah understood one final, painful truth: there was no going back. The choice had been hers, and now, she would pay the price.